the next thing. So in Grimoire Magic, right, in Grimoire Tradition, there are two main paths that one can approach the magic from. We've got the Grimoire Purist side of things, and we've got the Grimoire Traditional side of things. Now, on the purist side, or the purism side of things, Grimoire Purism is exactly what it sounds like. Purists believe that if one wishes to work with the grimoires, then they'll have to do exactly what the grimoire says, changing or omitting nothing. Joseph C. Lysiewski, who is the author of Ceremonial Magic and the Power of Evocation, Howlings from the Pit, and Kabbalistic Cycles and the Mastery of Life. I'm sure he's written other things, but those are the three like super popular ones that I'm aware of. He was a popular grimoire purist. I do believe he has passed on. Not trying to be mean or anything, but he was old when those books came out. If he is still around, he's got to be super old. But I'm confident that he is no longer with us. So that's why I say he was a popular grimoire purist. So he believed, and people who are grimoire purists believe that if you're going to work with the grimoire, you need to work it exactly as the grimoire itself states. You can't omit anything, you can't change anything, you can't add anything, there's no editing, modifying, changing, omitting, whatever. If the grimoire says to wake up at 6 a.m. and go to the top of Mount whatever and dance around and sacrifice a chicken and then jump off while doing backflips, that's what you have to do. And there's no way around that from a purist perspective, aside from using another grimoire, right? If that grimoire is too demanding, if that grimoire requires too much in the way of offering and sacrifice or materia, and you're just not willing to acquire those things, either due to their legal status within your country or their price, it might be expensive to obtain those items. Whatever it is, the only option would be to not utilize that text. There would be no other way around it from a grimoire purist perspective. However, on the opposite side, or not opposite, but on a much different side, there's the grimoire traditionalist, of which I would consider myself a grimoire traditionalist. And traditionalists believe in a plug-and-play style of working with the text. The majority of the grimoires follow a similar format and utilize many of the same materia magica. Traditionalists believe that magicians can mix and match materia from one text to another, so long as both texts are part of grimoire tradition. Okay, so as long as you're taking a grimoire from the, say, 16th century and mixing it with things from a grimoire from the 11th century, fine, right? The traditionalists would find no issue there as long as both texts are from grimoire tradition, or it can be syncretized with into grimoire tradition. Now, let's talk about some examples, and let me start with a personal example. Now, as I was saying in the previous slide, I am a traditionalist, and I believe 100% in the mixing and matching, or the plug and play mentality. I believe that I'm able to take the table of practice here from Trithemius, right? This is one of my table of practices. I have another one, but it's on much darker wood, and no matter what light I put it in, it never really shows up on camera really good. But I can use this modified Trithemian table of practice, because this isn't even a traditional Trithemian table of practice. This is modified. I can take this and I can utilize the sigils from, or the seals from, the Goetia, and I can take the conjurations from, the Book of Oberon, and I can mix and I can match, right? And I personally get that from Rufus Opus's Modern Angelic Grimoire. This is where I get my sort of Trithemian table of practice from, and a lot of my ritual process, right? And continuing on what I was just talking about, right? You can plug and play. You can mix and you can match. You can use orisons from the Enchiridio of Pope Leo, for example, prayers from the Book of Psalms, the conjurations from the Book of Oberon, the spirit list from the Goetia, and the seals from the Heptameron, and you can form a coherent, lucid evocation methodology. As long as the grimoires being used can be syncretized, not eclecticized, with the one you're using, you should be good to go. And this kind of plays into my theory. There's no actual evidence of this, or proof, I should say. But I would say there's a lot of evidence, not a lot of proof. Um, of my theory here, but my theory that due to the existence of the Liber Spiritum and the instruction for from Agrippa's or pseudo Agrippa's fourth book of occult philosophy for magicians to essentially create their own, I believe that is the existence of the Liber Spiritum and the call for magicians to make their own is a stark signpost, stick in the mud, I don't know what you want to call it, but a deviation from what came before to allowing plug and play. You know, even if people want to argue that there used to be some form of purism with the grimoires at some point, you know, ever since the, you know, request or the call for magicians to create their own Liber Spiritums, it it seems that the plug and play nature is paramount, right? It seems to pervade almost all of the grimoires that we know about, at least that are popular, or you know, well known within grimoire tradition. And well, let me not give too many examples because we'll continue to talk about it as we go further. But I do want to make a special mention here about eclecticism versus syncretism, because it says here, as long as the grimoires being used can be syncretized, not eclecticized with the one you're using, you should be good to go. So there's a difference between syncretization and eclecticization. And in my opinion, they are stark. There's, you know, you can't really confuse them, right? When something is syncretized, it goes together, right? It flows like Legos or any sort of Lego knockoff or whatever, right? When the pieces come together, they fit, even from different Lego sets, right? Even if it's from a set that's from someone else's house or something like that. My Legos and your Legos, they should be able to piece in together, right? Even though we didn't get them from the same set. So in terms of occultism, something that is syncretized would be things like Hermeticism and Christianity, right? Both religions come from the same region of the world, so therefore they share a lot of the same theology. They share a lot of the same eschatology, right? They share a lot of the same beliefs about God, you know, and the nature of, you know, being, ontology, and all that good stuff. So it wouldn't be too far fetched. Of course, many Christians, you know, might not agree, but Hermeticism and Christianity can be syncretized, which is why we have Christian Hermeticism or Hermetic Christianity, whichever form you prefer it in. But that's exactly why something like that exists, because those two religions are compatible, right? Those two spiritual paths are compatible because they come from the same region of the world and they share a lot of similar traits. Therefore, it makes a lot of sense for them to go together. Whereas eclecticism is something that we see in modern day spirituality in general, but we're not going to talk about all of spirituality. I'm not here to bash on the New Agers. That's my TikTok live streams. Here on Patreon, we're going to stay focused, and we're going to stick to occultism. And so in the context of occultism, a lot of people practice eclecticism by simply jumping into systems that they really don't understand and just pulling things out of those systems that they like and putting it into their own system and then just calling it a full-fledged system. In some cases, they might get lucky and things might flow together, right? But in more cases than not, they run into problems. And this is why people end up getting frustrated a lot early on, right, with their magical practice, right? They seem to be confused with their magical practice, even though the books that they're reading are the correct books, and the authors are legit, sound, real practitioners, not really giving into the mainstreaming new aginess of the occult, or even if they are, it's still a worthwhile read, and they still offer a practical advice. But for some reason, they're still confused, right? The reader, the practitioner that we're talking about in this case, for some reason, things are still, not clear for them. And a lot of times, it's because they're fusing things that should not be fused. And I don't mean that in a bad way, like, oh, they're going to get bad luck, but it doesn't make for a coherent system, right? An example. It doesn't make sense. I can't stop you, but it doesn't make any sense for you to try to use Egyptian. So you try to use the ritual process in the Greek magical papyri, right, for contacting a deity, but you use the prayers and the conjurations from ancient Chinese sorcery. I don't know what the let's say Tao of the Left, right? You use Tao of the Left, prayers, and all of your incense and your oils and your offerings are all things that don't correspond to Egypt or China. They're from Norse and Scandinavian magical texts. So those things are sacred to the Norse deities, have nothing to do with Egypt or nothing to do with China, right? And you're using I don't know, conjurations from some Mesoamerican magical text, from like I don't know, say they unearthed some Aztec or some Mayan magical book or whatever. You're using the conjurations from there. It's this mishmash of just different cultures and different practices, and you're trying to make a coherent system out of it simply because, oh well, this looks cool from the Aztecs, and this looks cool from the Hermeticists, and this looks cool from the ancient Chinese Tao practitioners, and this looks cool from the Scandinavians. Even though those things look cool, they're probably not going to be compatible, especially if they're not from the same region, right? It's one thing when you want to look at Celtic and maybe Norse and mix those together. I'm not saying that they are 100% compatible, but that makes a lot more sense than mixing Norse and, say, Aztec, right? Because they're not even from the same region of the world, so you wouldn't even expect much of anything to be similar, right? People make the mistake of thinking just because, these cultures have, oh, well, this culture has a god of death and that culture has a god of death. It must be the same god. Everything must be the same. That's not the case, not at all. So just wanted to make that distinction on syncretism versus eclecticism. As long as the grimoires are or can be syncretized, or the system that you're wanting to incorporate can be syncretized, then there should not be any sort of issue with using that as a practical way to work with the grimoires, right? I also think that's why in William Kiesel's Magic Circles in the Grimoire Tradition, he included entries from Andrew Chumbley's Azoatia, or however you pronounce it, Azoatia, or whatever. For the Goetia, I say Goetia, not Goetia. I say Goetia, so I'm going to assume for the Azoatia, that's how you also would pronounce it. Or the Azoatia, whatever. That's probably why he included that, because I don't know anybody that would consider Andrew Chumbley part of the Grimoire tradition, but most likely due to the syncretized nature of Chumbley's system with Grimtrad is why it has been included. All right, let's move on.